In this video, I'm going to talk about Rent2Rent HMO, how you can use the rent-to-rent strategy to control HMO properties, houses of multiple occupation. It's one of the fastest ways to replace your income and one of my favorite strategies. So my name is Simon Zutshi. I've been investing in property for over 25 years. I'm the founder of the Property Investors Network with 50 network meetings all over the country every single month. And also I'm the author of Property Magic, the Amazon #1 property bestseller. Now, HMOs are one of my favorite shows. Let me explain what an HMO is first of all. It's where you take a property and instead of doing a single let, where you rent to one person or a couple or a family, instead you rent to some unrelated people. And typically they get a room to live in with their own, sometimes their own private ensuite, which is a shower, a hand basin, and a toilet, or they might share a bathroom with someone else and they have shared kitchen facilities. Now the reason you do that is by renting out 5 or 6 individual rooms where they pay one amount each month. And then what that means is all the bills are included for them. So you, who are looking after the property or the landlord, you'll pay all the bills. But the rent you make collectively, add it all up, is much, much more than you would make renting out the property as a single let property. Now, there are a couple of different ways you can do rent-to-rent HMO. The first way is the easiest way, where you find someone who's already got a property that's set up as an HMO. That means they've already got all the fire safety things like the fire doors in place. They've got an interlinked smoke alarm, and you can then take that property on without having to spend a lot of money getting it ready. Now, why on earth would someone give you their property? Surely they would rent it out themselves. Well, it's very important that you never make any assumptions. It's a big mistake many investors make. There are people who own property who, for whatever reason, they don't want the hassle of letting it out. Maybe they're a distance landlord and they're trying to manage it remotely and it's not quite working out. And it might be a 6-bed HMO, but maybe they've only got 3 or 4 of the rooms full and they're struggling to fill up the extra rooms. Maybe it's a student property and for some reason the landlord had a group of students lined up to move in, but for some reason they decided not to come into the property. So you could take that property on and you could rent it out. Now, you might struggle also to find students, but what you could do is you could repurpose it and rent it to a different type of tenants, such as young professionals or working people, or even give it to a charity who's housing people on benefits, okay? So sometimes the way the current owner is using the property may not be the most appropriate strategy for that area. Or maybe they've got a letting agent who's looking after it who's just not doing a very good job. Maybe they've not put very good tenants in, they've not collected the rent, they've not paid the landlord the rent, and that landlord is fed up. So we're looking for someone who's got a property already set up as an HMO, but for whatever reason they're not maximizing the rent, it's a load of hassle for them, and if you come along and say, look, I'll give you a guaranteed rental income, actually that can be very attractive. Even though it's not the full market rent, they're pretty happy that at least they're getting all their bills covered, all the expenses, and they're still making some money without any risk to them. So how do we find these properties? How much do we pay to the landlord? That's what I'm going to teach you next in the video. A best way of finding these kind of deals is our direct to landlord letter campaign. So we can go and get the details of all the registered HMO landlords from the local council and we can send them letters. Now you don't want to send a letter to the HMO address because the landlord may not get it. You want to get their home address. Some councils provide it, many don't. You can go to land registry and download the title deeds and get the deals. So there are companies who you can pay to do these mail shots for you. And never send us one letter. You want to send a campaign of letters. Now, there are other people doing this, not as many people as you think, or not as many people doing it properly. Sometimes people just send a few letters out, or they only send a letter once. Look, the landlord might not get the letter. So you need to send several letters, and when they do get it, maybe it's not right the timing for them. Or even if it is the right timing, they put it on the to-do pile, they don't quite get around to it, that's when you need a reminder letter 2 months later, think, oh yeah, I am interested in that. So you've got to be persistent. No one ever said this is easy, it does take some time and effort, but the harder it is is good news for you because it puts off all the amateurs who are not prepared to put in some time and effort, okay? It does require some time and effort, but the time and effort is very well rewarded. So that's one way of finding those people. There's a completely free way of finding potential landlords. And that is by going onto websites like spareroom.co.uk, Gumtree, and look for landlords who are advertising rooms in their HMOs. Now, the reason they're advertising is because they've got some void periods. And look for ones maybe where actually they've got a really bad picture. It doesn't look very good. They've not dressed the room. It just looks terrible. And for that reason, people think, well, there's a much better accommodation. They're not even contacting the landlord. Because most landlords, they don't know what we know. If you're training, you're educating yourself, most landlords have just kind of made it up as they've gone along. That's what I did when I started. I didn't know any better. It's only recently, the last 15 years, I've really been educating myself and learning how to do this very properly and teaching my students how to do it much quicker than I did it myself. So look for the landlords who don't really know what they're doing. They're not doing a very good job. They're going to have some void periods. Now, you might think that they might want to get the maximum rent for their property. Well, if they do, good luck to them. They're not achieving the maximum rent right now. So a great question to ask a landlord is, well, how much are you currently making on the property? And if you can give them pretty much the same amount, but take away all the hassle, they might be throwing the keys at you. So let's say you rent a property for, I don't know, £1,200 and you could rent it out for £2,400. That's a really good profit margin for you. Now, bear in mind, you're going to have to pay the bills as well. On an HMO, typically a way of working out the bills is about every room is about £100 per month. So if you have a 5-bedroom property, the bills are probably going to be about £500 a month. 6-bedroom, about £600 a month. For you to take a property on, you need to make at least £100 profit per month in addition to covering the bills. So let's say it's a 5-bedroom property and you can rent it out for £2,400. The way you can work out how much to pay the landlord is you work backwards. So you say, okay, £2,400 is the maximum rent. Simon said, I've got to make at least £100 profit per room. So 5 rooms, so take off £500, that's £1,900. And then I've got to cover the bills. That's another £100 per room. That's another £500. So therefore that gets down to £1,400. £1,400 is the absolute maximum you can afford to pay that landlord. Ideally, you want to be paying them less to get more profit. Here's another rule of thumb that I learned from one of my students who does a lot of rent-to-rent. He said that he makes sure that the profit they make has to be more than the most expensive room they have available. So if you've got a room that you rent out for £600 because it's a bigger room, it's got an ensuite facility maybe, you need to make sure your minimum rent, your minimum profit is £600, because if that particular room is empty, then you're going to have £600 less coming in. So you got to make sure that your rooms are full all the time. So something to make sure you're aware, rent-to-rent is not a passive strategy. It's not one where you could just sit back and do nothing. Well, in fact, I don't think anything's like that in property. The whole point about rent-to-rent is you're coming in and you are doing a much better job managing the property, putting tenants in than the owner was doing on their own or the letting agent they had was doing. A letting agent, they're not incentivized. You know, if a room's empty, well, okay, it's empty. They make less money, but it doesn't cost them anything. It costs the landlord when a property's empty. It costs you when a property's empty as well. This makes you motivated and focused on filling those rooms as much as you possibly can. So to work out how much to pay, work out what's the maximum rent, and then work backwards from there. Now, I've got students who are making £1,000, even £2,000 because they got much bigger properties, 8, 9-bedroom properties, and they're bringing a huge amount of profit. Sometimes you need to do a little bit of work on the property. Sometimes you need to get some repairs done, you need to put some new furniture in, you need to make it look good. You need to don't do what the landlord's doing because you'll get the same result as them. So if they've got a really plain room, you might want to decorate it, put some dressing in there so the pictures look fantastic. When people visit the place, say, oh, this is really nice, I'd like to live here. You've got to help them imagine how great it's going to be. So therefore, there is some money required to do rent-to-rent, but you don't have to put in a big deposit. Now, I have a rule of thumb here. I think you want to get a 100% return on your investment. So let's say you're going to put £6,000 in to getting this property up and running and ready to go. In that case, you want to make sure you make £6,000 back in your first year. So in that case, £6,000 divided by 12 is £500 a month. Unless you're making £500 a month and getting all your money back in the first year, that's not a great deal. A mistake many people make when they're doing rent-to-rent HMO is they offer the landlord too much. So you want to make sure you put an offer that's going to work for the landlord, but it's also going to make you money, otherwise you don't want to do it. I've seen investors, especially when they're new, become too motivated. They try and get a deal so quickly that they end up paying too much. You don't want to take on a bad deal. Typically, you take them on for 3 to 6 months. 3 to 6 years. You could put a break clause in there, maybe after 6 months. If it's not working for you, give it back to the owner. But rather than do that, imagine you're buying this property, you do due diligence and check that you can rent it out and that there's a good strong rental demand because you want to make sure you're making money from this property. Remember, at the end of it, you're going to be giving the property back to the owner, so you don't want to spend too much money on the property. Now, sometimes the reason the property won't rent out is because maybe it's got a really bad kitchen. And you might spend £3,000 or £4,000 putting a new kitchen in. Well, do you really want to put a kitchen into a property you don't own? So you've got two choices. You can either say to the owner, look, I'll give you the guaranteed rent, but you've got to fix the kitchen first. You've got to do it to this specification. You could do that. Or it might be better for you to spend the money fixing the kitchen. But what you say to the landlord is, let's say you're going to pay them, I don't know, £1,000 a month rent. And you know the kitchen's going to cost you £4,000. You might say, tell you what I'll do. I'm going to fit a brand new kitchen, a £4,000 kitchen into your property, adding value to your property. But I don't really see why I should pay for that. So we've agreed £1,000 a month to you. What I'm going to do is the first 4 months, I'm going to keep that money to get my money back to pay for the kitchen. In that way, you've got a nice new kitchen, suddenly it's nice and desirable and rentable. Although you've put the money up front, it's going to come back out of the rental income. So that's one way of doing it. And I think that's better than getting the landlord to do it, because the landlord might say, yeah, I'll put a new kitchen in, and they skimp and they put a horrible £1,000 kitchen in, and then you can't rent it out, get the kind of rent you want to achieve. The other thing is when you do rent-to-rent HMO, I would suggest you get a little bit of a rent-free period. You need a little bit of time, at least a couple of weeks, if not 4 weeks, just to get the property ready so you can put people in, because obviously you need to start paying the landlord his money. You want to make sure rental income is coming in. So that's pretty much it. Just a few ideas on doing rent-to-rent HMO. I will just mention you can take on single let properties and rent them out as HMOs, but obviously you need to make sure you get the property up to the HMO standards, and bear in mind you have to give the property back to the owner in the same or better condition than when you took it on. It might be just a bit too much money to do that. So it's best to find a landlord who's already got an HMO set up. It might be a licensed one, it doesn't have to be, it depends on the local council, but it means you have to put less money in. And you're just looking for those people who are struggling to rent out on their own. You give them a guaranteed rent, that's what they want, they're nice and happy, and you can make a nice margin on the profit. If you've enjoyed this video, found it useful, please hit the like button. Got any questions or comments, put them in the comments below. I'll come and answer as many as I possibly can. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. We have at least one new video every single week, sometimes two. Click on the bell icon and you'll also get notified when new videos come through. I do hope you've enjoyed watching this. I'd like to encourage you to invest with knowledge, invest with skill. See you in the next video. I do hope you've enjoyed watching this particular video. And if you'd like to learn more about how you can benefit with HMO properties, I've got some further training resources for you that are completely free of charge. So if you look in the description below this video, there's a link. If you click on the link and register, you'll be able to access some far more detailed training about specifically how you can use HMO property investing in your portfolio. So I really urge you to come and register for that training with me. And also I've lined up another video for you all about HMOs and some great case studies to inspire you just what you can achieve when you're investing with HMOs. As always, I encourage you to invest with knowledge, invest with skill.